What if they really came? Beings from somewhere far beyond the stars. What would you expect? Explosions. Invasions. A grand entrance, loud, undeniable, unforgettable. That's what the movies taught us to believe. That they would arrive to conquer, to destroy, to take what's ours. But that's not how it happened. They came, quietly. No message. No threat. No declaration of intent. Just presence. Massive, overwhelming, and yet silent. They hovered, they waited. And the world, for once, didn't know what to do. In the film Arrival, humanity was forced to ask a terrifying question. What if the first step to understanding them is to stop trying to speak and start learning how to listen? But what if Arrival wasn't just fiction? What if something like that already happened or is happening and no one told you? Because the truth doesn't always arrive with fireworks. Sometimes it whispers. It didn't begin with an explosion. No flashes across the sky. No sirens. No countdowns. The end of the world, or perhaps the beginning of something else, arrived in silence. The sky just went quiet. Not audibly, no, but functionally. Every frequency we depended on collapsed. Satellites blinked out, radar screens froze, and there was nothing to indicate a malfunction. Just absence. As if something had asked the sky to be still, and it obeyed. I remember that day clearly. It was a Tuesday. I was at the lab, reviewing signal data from the Atacama array. Everything stopped. No solar flares. No glitches. Just silence. And then a feeling, a pressure behind the eyes, a strange awareness that you were being watched, not by a person, but by something vast. Something without form, yet unmistakably present. Phones died. Planes circled aimlessly above grounded runways. Global positioning systems spun like broken compasses. And then came the reports. People from all over the world saw it. Hanging in the upper atmosphere, unmoving, unresponsive. A perfect ring of pale cloud that didn't drift, didn't dissipate. It just hung there. The halo, they called it. It didn't glow, didn't hum. It wasn't made of metal or fire. It simply was. Like it had always been there, and we had only just learned how to see it. I watched it that night from my rooftop, as the city below pulsed with quiet panic. But up there above the towers and sirens and flickering screens, everything was still. The stars were gone. The halo was all that remained. It didn't make sense. People speculated weather balloon, military tech, atmospheric anomaly. But those were the words we used when we were scared, trying to explain something we didn't understand. And the most terrifying part was not that it did anything. It didn't. It never moved. It never spoke. It just watched. Or waited. Or maybe listened. And somehow, we felt that inside ourselves. It wasn't just the world that had gone silent. It was us. People forgot things. Time stretched in strange ways. Some said they dreamed in languages they didn't know. Others described an overwhelming urge to stop what they were doing and look up, as if some part of them knew something important was unfolding. Governments panicked. They shut down the internet. They grounded flights. Tanks rolled out onto highways with no enemy in sight. News anchors whispered rumors between silences. But nothing changed. The object stayed. It didn't react to threats. It didn't respond to attempts at contact. It simply remained, like punctuation at the end of a sentence we hadn't written yet. And in that quiet, something shifted. Not in the sky but in us. For once, humanity had no answer. No plan. No protocol. And so we waited. Not because we wanted to, but because something out there bigger, older, more knowing had whispered into the fabric of our world, "Now, be still." That was the day the sky stopped speaking. And something else, something ancient began to stir. At first, they thought it was a ship. Because that's what we do. We label the unknown with familiar terms. It was the only way to make sense of something that refused to fit. But the object wasn't a ship. It had no engines. No visible hull. No symmetry. No metal. No heat signature. Just form. Not even form, really just space bent around a presence that didn't seem to obey shape or time. It hovered above a desert range nowhere in particular, yet somehow central to everything. Satellites couldn't map it. Cameras blurred at the edges. Drones lost contact the closer they got. It didn't react to light, or sound, or touch. But everyone who came near it felt something. Like it was looking back without eyes. A perimeter was set. Not for its safety, but for ours. Because by then, the halo had replicated. 12 of them. Placed evenly around the globe above oceans, tundras, mountains, forgotten islands. None of them moved. None of them spoke. And none of them landed. They hovered. Like they were waiting for us to realize something. Not what they were, but what we weren't. I was part of a small team sent to the exclusion zone in the southwestern desert. We weren't soldiers. We weren't diplomats. Just people trained to listen. And even we didn't know what we were supposed to hear. The object sat like a silent monolith above the sand. It cast no shadow. It emitted no hum. It simply was. And standing beneath it was wrong. Not terrifying, just disorienting. Like being in a room where gravity points in every direction at once. Some cried. Some went quiet. One man walked away and never came back. Our gear malfunctioned. Clocks lagged. Batteries drained. But analog notebooks worked fine. Pens still moved. And that became our ritual, recording what couldn't be measured. I filled 37 pages with shapes. Not drawings. Not words. Just impressions. Each time I looked up at the object, my hand moved. Not automatically, but instinctively. Like the thing was writing through me. Like it had no language, but it understood how to use ours. Others described the same experience. Images. Symbols. Patterns that didn't repeat but somehow felt familiar. The military tried everything: LiDAR, sonar, infrared sweeps. Nothing came back. No reflection. No resistance. It was as if the object wasn't really there, but rather somewhere else, overlapping this world like a veil. And yet, it was as solid as anything. If you threw a stone, it would stop in mid-air. Not bounce. Not fall. Just stop. That's when the whisper started. Not sound, but presence. Like a voice carried on the memory of breath. It wasn't inside our heads, and yet it was nowhere else. It said nothing we could quote, but everything we remembered. We called it the pause. Because that's what it felt like. Like reality itself had paused to ask us a question. Not a challenge. Not a threat. A question. And we didn't have the answer. The object wasn't a ship. It didn't come to carry troops, or weapons, or emissaries. It didn't arrive. It appeared. And perhaps that's the distinction we failed to understand. It didn't come from somewhere. It came from when. Not a traveler in space, but something that stepped sideways into our moment, to see if we were ready. And as we stood beneath it, searching for the right words, I realized something that still shakes me even now. We thought they would speak. We were wrong. They were waiting for us to stop. We brought microphones. We brought translators. We brought language experts, speech analysts, signal decoders. Everything we thought we would need to understand them. But there was never a voice. No words. No sounds. Not even silence, really. Just presence. And that presence spoke more loudly than anything we could have imagined. It began with a change in perception. Not sudden, not dramatic, but like a curtain slowly lifting inside the mind. People reported strange sensations when near the objects. Not pain. Not fear. Just a sense that something was being rearranged. Not around them, but within them. Some saw light patterns on the inside of their eyelids. Others described waves of memory from places they had never been. A woman claimed she remembered the birth of her great-grandmother. A man dreamt of a language he couldn't speak, but understood perfectly. None of it made sense. And yet, none of it felt wrong. The objects never moved. Never changed. And yet, something was happening. We tried to communicate. Using light. Using math. Using images, vibrations, electromagnetic pulses. There was never a reply. But the longer we stood near the object, the more we stopped trying to send, and started to receive. It wasn't a message, not in the traditional sense. No words, no images, no direct meaning. It was like a pressure behind thought. Like standing in front of an idea so large, it couldn't be spoken. Only absorbed. One night, I dreamt of the object breaking apart. Not violently. Just unfolding. And inside it wasn't machinery, but time. Not a device. Not a being. But time itself, held in structure. The next morning, I found a note on my desk, in my handwriting. But I didn't remember writing it. It said, "Language is a limitation. They speak in structure. Not what something means, but what it is." That's when I realized. We had been expecting a message. But the object was the message. Their arrival wasn't to say something. It was to show us something. Not a sentence, but a concept. Not an idea, but an orientation. As if they weren't trying to talk to us. They were trying to turn us, gently, toward a different direction of seeing. After that, things changed. Not with the object, but with us. People stopped asking when it would speak, and started asking what they were now noticing that they hadn't before. Children described colors they hadn't seen. Artists began painting with symbols they claimed came to them in flashes. Engineers reimagined structures with no straight lines. Philosophers went quiet. It wasn't madness. It wasn't inspiration. It was contact. Just not the kind we expected. They didn't speak. Not with sound, or signs, or syntax. They adjusted us, and left us to hear the echo inside ourselves. And that was the moment the world stopped waiting for a voice, and started listening with its memory. They never moved. Not once. Not a shift. Not a rotation. Not a shimmer. From the moment they appeared, they simply remained. And that unsettled us more than if they had roamed the skies. Because everything moves. Clouds. Planets. Thoughts. Even stillness, over time, changes. But these objects didn't. The halo above our sight had been in the exact same position for 39 days. We measured it, timed it, watched it through sunrise, moonlight, sandstorm, snowfall. Not a single deviation. As if motion itself was irrelevant to it, or beneath it. At first, we assumed it was a kind of waiting. A pause before an action. A silent preparation. But what if that was the action? What if the point wasn't what would happen next, but what was happening right now? In our need for narrative, we searched for escalation. We expected the next step, the next sign, the next revelation. But it never came. Instead, we were forced to sit, and stare, and exist. And in that strange mirror of non-movement, we began to realize how much of our world was built on the need to move, to chase, to grow, to reach. But the halo taught us something deeper. That some presences are so vast. They don't need to act. They simply are. And their existence alters everything around them. People began to respond in unusual ways. One scientist stopped using past and future tense entirely. He claimed that time, near the object, felt less like a line, and more like a single, unmoving field. A pilot who flew near the Arctic halo reported seeing the sun set 3 times in the same sky, in the same hour, from the same position. The footage showed nothing. But he never flew again. Another man, an old linguist, sat beneath the object and wrote a single sentence over and over: the event is the presence. Not was. Not will be. Eyes. That sentence now sits in a museum. next to a replica of the halo. A replica that, by all accounts, is perfect, but feels completely hollow, because there was something in the stillness of the real thing that could never be reproduced. We called it dormant, inactive, motionless. But that wasn't true. It was doing something. Just not something we could quantify. Like a mountain growing in slow time. Or a black hole warping light in ways no eye could see. Maybe their kind doesn't move. Because they are movement. Of a kind we haven't evolved to perceive. Maybe they're not vessels or creatures or ideas. Maybe they're not even visitors. Maybe they're reminders. That reality is not defined by what changes, but by what endures. And in that unmoving silence, we began to hear the weight of existence itself. We were never truly listening. We monitored. We recorded. We cataloged every anomaly, every shift in temperature, every blink of static across a signal, but we weren't listening. Not in the way they needed us to. Because listening isn't hearing. It's surrender. It's the willingness to let something change you before you understand it. And that, we did not do. Instead, we tried to interpret. Tried to match what we felt to what we knew. We fed the unknown through systems built by the familiar. But what arrives from beyond understanding can't be translated by instruments of comfort. The halos didn't just appear. They didn't just speak. They didn't just remain. They echoed. Through us. Through our perception. Through every silent moment we tried to fill with meaning. And in our hunger for answers, we drowned out the signal. Not with noise, but with certainty. We told ourselves they must want something. That arrival implies intention. That contact demands purpose. But maybe they didn't come for us. Maybe we weren't the audience. Maybe we were simply witnesses. Unprepared. Uninvited. Unable to bear witness without demanding to understand. And so we failed. Not because we lacked knowledge, but because we lacked humility. The objects are still there. Motionless. Silent. Brighter, perhaps, than they were before. Or maybe we've simply dimmed. Teams are smaller now. Crowds have thinned. The world spins forward, already distracted by newer disruptions. But the halos remain. Not absent. Not hostile. Not broken. Just unchanged. And that may be the loudest message of all. Because maybe it was never about them reaching out. Maybe it was always about us reaching in and failing. Not permanently, not irreparably, but failing, still. And in that failure, a deeper silence grows. Not the silence of abandonment, but the silence before a second chance. If one is still coming. We kept asking, what do they want? But that was never the right question. Wanting implies lack, need, intention shaped by absence. But what if what arrived was not missing anything? What if it came whole? Then perhaps it didn't arrive to communicate, but to resonate. Not to give us a message, but to awaken one already buried inside. The halos never blinked, never shimmered, never acted like they were waiting. They were just there, unshaken, unmoved, unworried by our confusion. The world, over time, folded them into its background. Like ancient monuments whose meanings were forgotten, but whose presence shaped the land around them. Some say they're dormant. Others say they're dying. Some believe they're listening still. But not to us. To what, then? Maybe, to something beneath us. Or before us. Or something we've forgotten to remember. The language we sought was never carved in sound. Never written in syntax. Never coded in particles or pulses. It was space. It was time. It was presence. They did not come to deliver anything. They came to exist in front of us. And in that, they hoped we would begin to see ourselves differently. But we were too loud, too proud, too eager to interpret, not to receive. And so the message slipped through us. Not like water, but like light passing through glass. That never realized it was transparent. And yet, not all was lost. There were those who changed. Quietly. Inwardly. Without report, without reward. They began to speak less. Think slower. Perceive patterns no one taught them to see. They disappeared from cities. From institutions. From language itself. Some say they were taken. Some say they simply stepped sideways. Out of time. But one left something behind. Not a confession. Not a theory. Not proof. Just a page. In a locked journal. On a shelf deep underground. It read, the message was never words. It was the silence between what we thought and what we felt. They didn't teach us. They reminded us. And under that a set of coordinates. remote, frozen, uninhabited, but not unknown, because something else was found there, something buried, long before the halos appeared, older than our languages, and shaped not by hands, but by memory itself. White heavy check mark to be continued. Episode 2 begins where memory ends. They were already here. They didn't come to conquer. They came to awaken something we forgot to listen to. But the story doesn't end here. If anything, this is where it begins. What if they've always been here? What if the signs were never above us, but beneath? If this episode sparked a thought, a question, a memory, leave it below. We want to know. What would you like to explore next? A hidden artifact? An ancient language that never died? Or the people who changed after the contact? We're building this story together. So subscribe. Share this with someone who still wonders. And stay with us, because the next chapter is already unfolding.